بهره برداری امن از موبایل و اینترنت، زن، حقوق فردی و اجتماعی، سازوکارهای جلوگیری از نقض حقوق بشر، پویشی در مفهوم دموکراسی، مروری بر پایگیری نهادهای مدنی در ایران، اندیشه‌های نوین از حقوق کارگران، آموزش خبرنگاری، حقوق شهروندی امروز و محیط زیست. توانا، رایگان توانایی ما را به سمت انسان امروزین جهانی متمدن تازه می کند. برای شرکت در این کلاس ها به توانا.org بروید و با جیمیل مستعار ثبت نام کنید. از طریق فیسبوک، توییتر و شبکه یوتیوب می توانید آموزشکده توانا را دنبال کنید. توانا آموزشکده است برای جامعه مدنی ایران.
Yochai Benkler was last here 5 years ago when we were down at Pace University, and we've wanted him to be back to speak at PDF, and normally in June he takes a family vacation. It's a tradition for him. We got lucky this year. His plans changed, so we were able to get him to come on fairly short notice, but it is really a thrill to welcome Yochai Benkler back to PDF. He's the author of probably the seminal work for many of us, The Wealth of Networks. Highly recommend that you go read it if you haven't read it, because it is to the internet economy what Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations was for thinking about capitalism. He teaches at Harvard Law School. He's the co-director of the Berkman Center for Internet and Society, and he's going to talk to us about the SOPA PIPA fight as a case study of how the network public sphere, this new ecosystem that we're living in, how it works and why we need to defend it. Yochai Benkler.
Thanks, Micha, for that incredibly generous introduction. It's great to be back at PDF. What I want to try to do in the next 12 minutes is tell us a story about what happened in SOPA PIPA as we're seeing it fall out of the data in the media cloud and controversy mapper system that we're building in order to try to actually get some data-based analysis of what happened and how it flowed over time. And in that process, also begin to answer some of the questions that Leslie was asking earlier about what the techniques are, what the connections between people are, and perhaps to begin to give us an image of what a future networked public sphere could do to push back on the power of money. So if in the 1990s we had the moment where we believed in a Jeffersonian democracy coming, the Supreme Court wrote about everyone a town crier, everyone a pamphleteer. Over the course of the 2000s, we saw a series of interventions based on data as best we had it then that suggested that the internet was fragmented, concentrated. You can talk, sure, pamphleteer, but no one will hear you. Polarized and ineffective. The ties were too weak. And yet there's no way that that can explain a lot of our actual experiences, and it certainly cannot explain this unique, or we hope not unique, but special moment in terms of the ability to look at it, of what happened when something moved from 18 months ago on September 20th, 2010, being described by The Hill in the most technical, uninspiring terms. How could you be against it? Leahy and Hatch, co-sponsor, COICA, billions of dollars, thousands of jobs, bipartisan. IP is not a partisan thing. It's something else. 18 months later, people come to Wikipedia and this is what they see. Imagine a world without free knowledge. How did we move from three of the wealthiest, most powerful lobbies in DC supporting a completely bipartisan bill to this and the complete collapse of this piece of legislation. And what do we understand from that about how the network public sphere really works, at least at its most ideal context? And admittedly, this is the most ideal context. And more importantly, from that lesson, what chunks can we begin to identify that we can reuse in future campaigns? So in the first week, all of the initial alarming stories come from tech media. This is all based on over 10,000 stories over the course of the 18 months, based on text and link analysis, size identifying who is most linked to in that week. It's mostly a West Coast media thing. There's a little bit of the Hill story down there. But a week later, several things emerged that remain stable over the course of the next 18 months. TechDirt emerges as a major clearinghouse for information. Look for yourself. GovTrack becomes important. The EFF becomes an important source. Demand Progress, and down at the bottom there being cut off for some reason, we're seeing the computer electronics industry. So TechDirt had over 900 stories over this period, multiple links. Interestingly, the most linked to one, this one, ended up being itself subject to a DMCA notice takedown and was unavailable for Google searches for a month in the life imitating life moment. The EFF played both a clearinghouse, but also a place where another thing that began to emerge, which was periodic expert attestation about what's wrong with this. So in this case, early in that week, an open letter from internet engineers usually would not find its way to any op-ed in the mass media system, has an outlet. Demand Progress, another piece that bumps up that week, starts with the next step of converting to action, the petition that ultimately has 300,000 people. And the consumer electronics industry publishes this letter by more traditional organizations primarily pushing forward. As in the lame duck, as the Senate committee passes this act, you've got see for yourself cultural discourse, the GovTrack being very large. You see the EFF, you see CNET. Senator Wyden puts a hold on it in the prior Congress, and what you see here are two things. First of all, to the cat signal, the EFF here raising the alarm, and second, public knowledge raising all of the set of letters. Here's a whole set of letters that was published at the time, and interestingly, you see the rise of the right wing of the blogosphere also emerging. So whether it's Don't Censor the Net coming out of Patrick Ruffini, whether it's Hot Air, whether it's Cato at Liberty, whether it's a bunch of other places, you see the right beginning to say, this is not us. We move on to phase two and PIPA. Public knowledge starts to come and take the same role that EFF played in the first time around as information clearinghouse. The tech media continued to play a very large role, and TechNet continues. And Don't Censor the Net moves to add this petition that we also saw from Demand Progress. So again, you see these connections on both sides, connecting how we talk about this, moving from IP to censorship, and combining with action both left and right. The following week, tech media rise very significantly. Here you see, by the way, the only counter. You do see, it's not that there's no information. Back to the point you were making, Alexis, about you can't let anything ride. It's not that there are no efforts to get into the conversation by people who support the act. The AFL-CIO comes out very strongly in favor of it, but there's less amplification because instead of what captures the most audience being out there in the mass media, it's what captures the most emotion and enthusiasm to link to and point to each other and say, this is me, this is how it connects to me. The next week, Senator Wyden puts a hold, and everybody looks at that and points at that and says, that's the act of heroism, but things don't quite go away. Microsoft also there supports the act still at this time. That's another thing that shows up that week. Fascinating in this case is this is a sweet, slow news week. There's almost nothing, which allows for the rise of this. What is here on InfoJustice that suddenly emerges in this week? It's this highly technical analysis of how this particular approach will break DNS-sec. So what it means is that something that couldn't in a million years in the mass-mediated framework get any attention becomes something that people can actually see. And instead of just saying, oh, internet is all bytes, This is very detailed, could never make it in a longer. It's not that the Times doesn't matter at all. There's 1 week in which Times opinion is really important, and they come out against it, and that's important, but it's alongside everything else. The following week is quiet, and then a new phenomenon emerges. Look at what happens in this week, where USV, where Union Square Ventures, suddenly blows up as a major item that people are looking, primarily linking to this story of Brad Burnham's, identifying a letter from venture capitalists saying this will break the environment that we want. Again, we're not picking friends from a crowd. We're trying to identify from the data what were the things that people started to pay attention to. We move then to phase 3, to SOPA, and we begin to see the emergence of new voices. Here, what's very powerful in the last week of October